A long time ago, there was a large and frightening woman named Madame J, as her customers called her, because she sold the best meat soup. Her ingredients were always fresh and the best in the market. Every market day, she would arrive with her large cooking pots. She spoke to no one, and soon the villagers would gather around her, and before long, her pots were sold out in the blink of an eye. As soon as she sold all her inexpensive food, she would calmly leave with her empty pots. The villagers wondered how such a large woman could cook and sell such delicious soup at such a low price, so affordable that even beggars could eat to their heart's content. Most of the meat chunks were so large they could be kept until the next day, all for a minimal price. The majority of food vendors were envious of her. "I wonder how she profits from her cooking. It's crazy. With the cost of things, she must not live in this country to sell her food so cheaply," one woman said bitterly. "She's already taken all our customers." Every Sunday, a child would go missing, either from the neighborhood or the market, but most of the missing children were often abducted from the market by unknown means. The villagers could not solve the mystery because the love that always existed among the village residents made it impossible to identify the culprit and their true intentions. This did not bother Madame J much, as she rarely spoke to people, except when her customers came to buy from her. Despite her cheap food, she had an attitude of aloofness, a don't-disturb-me demeanor, and always kept her distance, never mingling with the other women. The children found Madame J intimidating and strange because whenever they played football and their ball accidentally touched her soup pot, she would scream in rage. Most of the time, Madame J would puncture their ball with a knife, making the children cry at the market and complain to their parents. The village children never dared to disturb her, especially when she was cooking or present at the market. During this time, one girl in particular named Amina noticed how grumpy and mean Madame J was, and how people continued to buy from her despite her poor behavior towards the villagers. Amina decided to follow her when she finished her day's sales. One evening, after Madame J had completed her sales for the day as usual, she immediately closed her stall, grabbed her pot, and headed toward the forbidden forest, against which the village elders had already warned their children. There were many frightening versions of the story surrounding this forest. The cursed forest. One version said that the evil spirits of the villagers held their meetings there, and other frightening scenarios that words could not explain. Amina watched as Madame J entered the forest. Why is she going toward the forbidden forest? She should know how cursed this forest is, thought Amina, her mind tormented by negative thoughts. She followed Madame J, trying to walk on tiptoe so as not to be seen. Even while walking quietly behind her, fear filled Amina's mind with questions she couldn't possibly ask Madame J in person. Madame J walked faster and faster, and Amina, who was following her, sped up too, so as not to lose her, and above all, not to get caught. Amina opened her mouth, stunned. Witches really did exist. She saw 5 women in ghostly robes gathered around a large fire, waiting for Madame J, who was still carrying the large pot she used to cook for her customers. Amina quickly hid behind a mango tree. She watched as the women exchanged greetings and discussed with Madame J how they would share the money she had earned from her food business, as well as their plans to abduct more children from the community. Amina's troubled thoughts were interrupted by the crackling of a dry leaf she had accidentally stepped on. Immediately the women's eyes turned toward her. Madame J was furious, still holding her large pot. Amina watched in terror as each woman fixed her gaze on her, their discussion coming to an abrupt halt out of fear of being seen and of possibly becoming a victim. Amina took 2 slow steps backward before bolting, retracing her path out of the forest as fast as she could. Upon reaching the village square, still sweating and out of breath, she tried to catch her breath, with an expression that revealed she had seen something extraordinary. She explained everything to the village king. "But why would a poor orphan like you follow Madame J into the forest? You know the consequences of your actions. What if you had been possessed or worse? Are you sure about what you're saying?" "I hope this isn't a joke," said the king, adjusting his position on the throne, his eyes fixed on Amina. He then ordered his guards to go into the cursed forest to drive out the evil women. Meanwhile, in the forest, the barbaric women, including Madame J, were worried about the girl who had seen them and were discussing the possibility of returning to the village. Madame J suggested that they stay in the forest, otherwise they would all be killed by the villagers because the little girl had discovered their secret. The guards began their journey toward the cursed forest, accompanied by Amina to guide them. As soon as they reached the spot where Madame J and her accomplices were hiding, the guards moved toward them, dragged them out of their hiding places, and tied their hands like slaves, beating them severely. They saw all the children's clothes hanging from each tree and took everything. They dragged the women back to the village square, where all the villagers were gathered. The king was first astonished to see the clothes of the children they had killed. Then he spat on Madame J and her accomplices, who had committed such a sacrilege. Some villagers who had eaten Madame J's food wept with regret, while the parents of the children she had killed cried out in immense pain. The king then ordered the villagers to stone them to death, as they did not deserve to live. Thanks to Amina, who had saved the community, the king rewarded her for her bravery. The moral of this story is to be careful of what you eat outside and never kill anyone to replace an animal.